Alright guys, the reason they're considerable has been enough, okay, whether reason and whether accountable enough of the agitation moment, maybe here in first whether whether reason and whether probable, two nodes and whether a bit two and a bit more, whether also considerable as two nodes a bit postponed. Reason there has been and whether reason there and whether soon to be a bit minor repetition of there have been enough of external factor and here in this moment probable suitable. We've got quite extensive nonsense and probable. These the usual racially identified entities are the automatron robots of those areas. These are mid-phrasal whether started to rise as passive aggressive agricultural response. The brutalness and sheer atrocity these had inflicted. Doesn't have to murder. A lot of times it doesn't down our guys, it simply degrade them. And what is that? That's utterly equivalent to murder, because then the person is no longer there. Distortion sets it a lot. Consider if I open a Battlefield 1 account, soon to be, and whether in the next few months, and name it as the original formulated, and whether it's also whether reason and whether the formulating, whether reason and whether minor rather the original formulating was of. You are extremism. Do not, in the clan name being, do not compete with me. There will be blob. Noticing the language is being absolutely the sheer amount of nonsenses. If I'm doing it right, I'm doing it wrong. Because these define successes, and these could talk it over. And suppose they could pick any spells, but will still act moderate. All of these automatron robots been plotting against us. It's one of the reasons culture don't flourish, and one of the reasons folks are all kinds of goofy at the start point, agitated, etc. Notice, and it's due to terrorism threat. A lot of stuff are done. Because these entities are after cycles, they should have been calmed down. Suppose there wasn't the anti-Hitler movement. Could there be? But anyway, the anti-Hitler movement was posed after many of the other ones similar. And this one was sort of a finale, and whether a larger one, whether the one was sort of labeled, and whether commonly, and whether also you casually, and whether usually, whether minor rather their reason there, usually labeled, whether named, and whether also titled, and whether computer reason to, for whether to reason to, for whether reason to, and whether stuff as sort of the climax and whether the major event. It quizzes at our guys about grammar. You want to slaughter the lions, and has lions at some instance around these zombies, some potent, indestructible entities. And whether reason there, and whether minor of, and whether reason and whether minor of, and whether reason there, whether reason or whether minor of rather, whether reason there, minor and minor rather of. At some instances, this entity that's going to target others. There's Mandarin. Why don't someone start to learn it? Extremism starts at not having this yearning. These goes casual talk while their actions completely different. Yet there's still this mediocre treatment as if it's like persons are not trying. So many citizen card holders' wrists are not trying at all to remove degeneracy. Are they in this global humanoid degeneracy, this long-lasting sort of greed, and this gains? It can be quite of providence of, but also not done properly. Something of probably important enough, and whether also considerable, whether also important note to measure. We might transfer two notes here onto this medium. First note being whether reason there and whether reason and whether minor rather. There's a tons I wrote about Nazism, and someone else do something. It cannot be just prime ministers and a couple of their fellow folks, and including me, whether reason and whether plus moi, and whether reason and whether at first, and whether reason and whether minor, instead of whether reason and whether also, and whether reason and whether minor rather, and plus and whether reason and whether, and me together, whether reason and whether doing this. I have to be sort of producing essays to get it moved, but it hasn't moved after all these essays. This has been proven. This has been example as planet. Giant clock and the mass patterns, these are factor Turing machines, are playing president. Each of our guys, whether most of, are pretty much whether virtue similar to, and whether virtue alike to this, whether reason and whether minor relative, whether reason and whether just, and whether reason and whether similar to, whether reason and whether similar like to, and whether reason and whether like some, and whether reason and whether similar to some class clown. In the perspective of the class clown, whether in the perspective of the roles commonly referred to, whether reason and whether in the perspective of the ones and whether the associate to the term, and whether to the names, and whether to the titles, whether reason and whether to class clowns, and whether reason and whether also minor, and whether reason and whether minor rather of. In the perspective of the namely and whether reason and whether of combination named, and whether reason and whether of the usual name, whether associated to, whether reason and whether minor rather of, and whether reason there, and whether in the perspective of the terms as whether reason and whether like, and whether reason and whether names such as, and whether reason and whether names like class clowns. They regard it as if they are a champion, they are a president, they are a ruler of the world. How can someone rule in terms of that when they cannot outwit me in a lot of areas? For example, whether reason and whether reason and just, and whether reason and whether, for instance, and whether reason and whether minor pronunciation, and whether reason and whether reason and just, and whether reason and just, and whether reason and whether reason and another, and whether reason and whether reason and just, and whether, for instance, one of the notes, the first one being whether reason there. Lots of the entities, whether those kind of as a bit of a beginning, starting to be whether beginning as, and whether beginning to be of, whether reason there, whether beginning to be, whether reason there, whether as a rhetorical expression of the confusion from reason there to, and whether it's probable of. Lots, and whether reason and whether those doesn't have, and countable as generalization, reason thereof, and whether reason there, and whether thereof. And by the way, whether reason and whether, how vicious and severe is the situation. Much as imprinted if there are so many innocents who are futile not to defend Detroit, while these are so fast and pervasive as if whether prevailing, whether practice, and whether pervasive as if these practiced towards targeting against us. We are prosecuted as if we are namely, and whether reason and whether as if we were the big fishes. This has been a cultural level contamination. America should not be a hub, or whether a landing zone of all these escapees and these passive aggressive factor Turing machines. The numbers of this volume were reached by them engineering itself to war against all others. They're mentally crazy, and not even here. In the case of the Nazis, whether reason that much of the Nazis, whether reason the Volov, and whether reason whether the Nazis, some automatron robots, and whether reason and whether minor rather of, and whether reason and whether also, and whether reason and whether minor also, whether reason and whether also minor instead of, and whether probable of. These ones in ways study a lot more than me, study a lot more than all of us. Whether reason and whether minor instead of, and whether also, and whether reason and whether also, whether reason and whether reason there, and whether reason there, and whether minor rather of. Much more than our guys, whether reason and whether more than our guys. These really participate, and does some dramatism ever with a factor churn in this mediocrism? It will appear whether cast is and whether dramatized as if it's this, and does this, it keeps on trying to interrogate whether to integration reason error, whether and rather of whether reason error and whether and rather to probable whether reason error to of whether reason to probable of reason there a bit of a replacement of what's probably to be for whether also a bit of overwritten to this whether reason there whether all overwritten to probable reason adjacent there whether reason there to have a similar effect to probable to could be and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether to probable to as solve and whether reason there to probable to could be solved. Whether reason and whether minor rather and whether reason there to probable to could be of and whether reason there and whether this and whether reason there just and whether reason there and whether this preemptive or whether reason or whether pre-adaptation, whether reason or whether this adaptation to the counters and counter sort of a road towards some very far end. But those probably won't succeed because G was played the first whether reason there and whether also whether reason and whether minor instead of laid the first card. And this decides who will prevail in this time match. That's also considerable whether also of a win and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether considerable as victories and faultiness and whether reason and whether on victory, whether reason and whether not, and whether reason and whether as noble victories. If for many standardization of languages shackled against us, then we probably won't be able to, whether probable counter towards modernity, then it's much for whether much for whether not won't be so smooth, and whether will be probably unsustainable, whether reason and whether minor rather, and whether will be much and whether reason and whether much difficulties, and whether reason and whether a much difficulty, but reason there and whether minor rather of probable of which whether reason and whether also whether reason and whether instead of to probable of to also to could be of. And whether reason and whether it's probable to could be of to probable to also to could be of, and whether it's probable of to reason and whether it's probable to could be of. Reason there is probable countable as a minor repetition of, and whether reason and whether as a minor repronunciation. Those doesn't have they have very much specificness of whether in whether reason and whether constant specific, whether reason and whether constant enough to be mentioned as, and whether reason and whether mentioned as, or whether reason and whether is mentionable as, or whether reason and whether reason of on whether reason thereof and whether a minor instead of whether reason and whether minor rather for whether at first of whether just and whether reason and whether minor rather of. Majority today instances of whether majority moments, whether reason or another, whether reason or whether have much specificness, whether reason or whether have much specificness of whether reason and whether have much specific to reason or whether reason or two stuffs. Though it and whether reason and whether two things. Whether reason and whether to whether activities, events, and actions in places, and whether reason and whether events and activities in other places, and whether reason and whether two stuff, and whether another, and whether reason and whether two stuffs, and whether reason and whether are much specific to stuffs, and whether reason and whether are specific, and whether reason and whether another, and whether reason and whether minor rather thereof, from whether reason and whether minor rather of, and whether reason and whether are much specific to stuff, and whether reason and whether are much specific to stuff, and whether reason and whether are much specific to stuff. So So their basis name and whether recent and whether, namely their basis whether recent and whether minor additive, and whether recent and whether recent error and whether just, and whether recent error and whether though they're and whether recent error and whether though namely the bases are short, whether recent and whether though namely their bases are short of. The recent error of the regular trace pronouns can be considered as properties of whether recent could be considered as properties of whether recent and whether recent and whether could be considered as properties of. And probable also downplay and perhaps also of probable service of. I had whether reason much of being probable has been addressed on the books and whether contents on the various mediums. Je does want to namely and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether for examples of from whether reason and whether probable shout it out and whether reason shout and whether scream it as much and whether reason and whether as much and whether reason and whether minor additive and whether reason and whether as much as and whether reason and whether vestiges of and whether reason and whether vestige of. With the specificness that their bases are short and considerable as not qualified to be around whether reason and whether minor additive and whether the probable of adoption of and whether the probable of makes those and whether reason and whether of found whether reason and whether of and whether minor additive and whether reason and whether so and whether of its overwritten effect there and whether probable and whether retrieval of the reason and whether the opposite option for whether reason there and whether reason and just and whether reason and whether just and whether reason and whether of whether reason there and whether rather and whether reason and whether from whether reason there and whether then those and whether reason and whether those and whether reason there and whether they and whether reason and whether those and whether reason there and whether reason there another and whether reason there and whether those wouldn't be regard to or reason and whether wouldn't be and whether reason and whether another and whether reason there just and whether reason and whether reason there and whether wouldn't be and whether reason and whether those wouldn't be and whether reason there and whether then those wouldn't be and whether reason there and whether those wouldn't be and whether reason and whether those and whether reason there and whether then those wouldn't be accountable and whether reason there and whether then those wouldn't be and whether reason there and whether those wouldn't be regarded to as fellow party members of accountable as a bit of a comparison of whether comparative of whether reason there and whether reason there just and whether reason there and whether a bit of a whether reason and whether a example and whether also whether reason and whether an instance of. Accountable also transfer whether reason and whether accountable this note and whether reason and whether here in this note soon to be and whether reason and whether accountable is transferred to here in this medium of whether reason and whether of and whether reason and whether reason and whether of and whether reason and whether just and whether reason and after and whether just and whether reason and whether reason and whether just and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether just and whether reason there 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 another and whether reason there and whether to probable reason to two and whether three and whether reason and whether to two three to could be considered as minor repetition whether also whether reason and whether minor repronunciation of whether reason there and whether considerable as a great timing of whether of moments of whether of perhaps of moment's precedence, and whether recent there, of whether recent there, and whether recent there, just whether recent there, and whether perhaps of moment's precedence, and whether recent there, whether of, and whether recent there, whether of, and whether recent there, and whether of. Catable, and whether recent there, and whether also, and whether recent there, and whether it's probable of, and whether minor rather of, to of which whether recent there, to of whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether also a bit of, and whether recent and whether moderate rather of, and whether recent there, another whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether recent and whether recent there, and whether minor rather of, and whether minor rather of, and whether recent there, and whether of, and whether recent there, and whether recent there, and whether of, and whether recent there, and whether recent there, another, and whether recent there, and whether minor rather of, and whether minor rather of, and whether recent there, and whether so it could be a bit time dilation of, and whether recent there, whether a earlier note of, on whether recent there, and an earlier note of whether recent there, and whether a at earlier whether recent there of a considerable as and whether recent and whether probable of considerable as a minor repronunciation of, and whether recent there, and whether and whether recent there, and whether of decent instance capture whether recent and whether perhaps of, and whether recent and whether probable of, and whether minor rather of, and whether recent there, and whether a moment sort of match, and whether recent and whether instance match, and whether recent and whether probable of, and whether minor rather of, and whether recent there, and whether perhaps of and whether recent and whether and whether recent and whether another, and whether recent and whether perhaps of and whether recent and whether and whether another, and whether recent and whether perhaps and whether recent and whether another, and whether recent and whether a moment, and whether recent and whether perhaps of, and whether recent and whether probable, whether recent and whether probable of, minor rather of, and whether recent and whether perhaps of, and whether recent and whether probable of and whether recent there, and whether recent there, and whether recent there, and whether probable, whether recent and whether probable of a moment match of, and whether recent there, and at earlier time dilation, and whether moment precedence, and whether of, and whether recent there, and whether a instance match, and whether recent there, and whether recent it does, but and whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether also moderate, and whether recent and whether perhaps of, and whether moderate rather of, and whether recent there. They're considerable as similar to the original formulative, perhaps of on the sense of whether recent or perhaps of whether recent and whether also whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether recent and whether another, and whether recent and whether also of, and whether recent and whether recent and whether also, and whether minor rather for whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether recent and whether of the phrases belong to whether recent and whether minor rather of, and whether recent and whether of the phrases of this quantization. Reasoner accountable as probable minor from whether a syllable, whether reasoner whether of a minor syllables remark, reasoner of whether reasoner and whether of phrases of instance, whether reasoner and whether first moments matching whether reasoner and whether reasoner and whether instance match of to considerable as comparative and whether not of whether reasoner not within the original formulated phrase and whether phrases and whether reasoner and whether treated to whether reasoner and whether phrases and whether reasoner and whether another and whether reasoner and whether phrase and whether phrases and whether phrase sets of and whether reasoner and whether just and whether reasoner and whether reasoner and whether not and whether reasoner and whether just and whether reasoner and whether minor rather and whether reasoner and whether just and whether reasoner and whether similar to and whether reasoner and whether considerable of and whether reasoner and whether probable of considerable of similar to original formulating of whether reasoner and whether probable of considerable as and whether reasoner and whether probable of considerable of as similar to whether reason and whether probable of considerable of similar to original formulating of and whether reason and whether probable of considerable of similar to whether reason and whether similar to whether reason and whether to original formulating and whether the original formula and whether reason and whether the formula original formula and whether reason and whether formulation and whether reason and whether minor rather and whether reason and whether probable from whether reason and whether minor instead of from whether reason and whether two original formulations of whether reason and whether two original formulated and whether reason and whether another and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether two original formulations of whether reason and whether and whether reason and whether and whether reason and whether at initial instance of whether reason and whether and at initial instance of whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether at initial instance of whether reason and whether also whether reason and whether two original formulations of whether reason and whether two original formulating versions of whether reason considerable as a minor pronunciation or whether reason just or whether reason there and whether reason and whether namely from whether reason and whether the second one, and whether reason and whether minor rather from whether reason and whether minor instead of from whether at first from whether reason and whether at first of whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether at first from whether reason and whether probable of probable from whether reason and probable of considerable as minor remark and whether remarks of from whether reason and whether also minor remarks as from whether reason and whether yes and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether from whether reason and whether minor remark and whether remarks of and whether remark set of and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether minor remark and whether remarks of and whether reason and whether minor remark and whether minor remarks of whether reason and whether not and whether reason and whether minor remark and whether remarks of and whether reason and whether two original formulating versions of whether reason and whether two original formulating version of whether reason and whether two original formulating version of and whether reason and whether minor rather and whether reason there continues and look to whether reason and whether minor rather and whether reason there and whether minor rather and whether reason there and whether two original formulating version of